to episode 2 of the Rugby League Coach podcast. We're back, better than ever.
That wasn't hard,
mate. We promised the viewers that we'd do this unedited and be as natural as possible.
And the listeners.
Yeah, and the listeners. I'm currently laying in my spare bedroom with my super dad pajamas on with the Avengers all over it.
Mate, I've just been having a little snooze there on the sofa, just catching up with NRL 360 and 100% footy from last night. So, bloody hell, Gus Gould, he should just be called Pinocchio.
Did you say you just had a snooze while watching those shows? Is that what you're saying?
I was sort of fighting the urge listening to Gus Gould. I mean, some of the things he's saying about the Bulldogs coaching position, I mean, why would Bulldogs fans listen to him? So on the day that he sacked Trent Barrett, by all accounts, he said the phone has been ringing red hot. He then said on 100% footy last night that nobody had rang him and nobody had replied.
Yeah, and I find that hard to believe. Are you telling me that no one wants to be the Bulldogs head coach right now? Nobody.
I'd heard you'd applied, Taylor.
I applied. But they wouldn't let me back through the front door.
Yeah. Or the back door.
Got rid of this kid 12 years ago. We're not getting him back in now.
That's right. Yeah. No, so I just find that, I mean, I'm a massive Gus fan in terms of most of the stuff that comes out of his mouth. He did sack me from Penrith, but I've never held that against him, as I was lucky enough to have a great schoolboy career only just starting to blossom. And I never met Gus to this day, so I've got no reason to dislike him really. But some of the things he's been coming out with in the last year and a half are getting close to being dinosaurish, vis-a-vis shoulder charges or high tackles and whatnot. And then I think just the way he's discussed Trent Barrett's future, the end of the Trent Barrett era, I found it a bit condescending to the fan, a bit condescending to the viewer, a bit condescending to Trent Barrett. And I think for him to come out and say this week that he's not had a phone call about the Bulldogs job and he's not thought about it, well, if nothing else, he should be called out for a dereliction of duty, because I would have thought that thinking about who the next coach of the Bulldogs should be would be the top job on his list. So, I just think it's just an absolute silly thing to come out of his mouth, really.
Yeah, I think he says a lot of things they just come out of his mouth. I don't think he thinks about it. Like, in reality, if you're at the Bulldogs at the moment, you want a quality. The biggest thing you should be thinking about is a coach for next year, because you haven't had a good one. You've got an interim coach in at the moment. The Dogs need something big. They need a big coach. They need a big name. That's what their fans want. That's what their fans need.
This is a great conversation to be having. I mean, we've not planned this one, obviously, but we're on Coaches Week this week on the podcast. And I think, number one, if I was the owner of the Bulldogs or one of the chief shareholders or donators, sponsors, I'd be straight on the phone to Gus and say, was that true what you said? So if it's not true what he said, why is he saying it? Number two, if it is true, I'd be saying, why the hell is the coach not top of your list? And Paul Kent made a good point as well today as we record on NRL 360. He says, Gus has never not had a plan for the next coach. So every coach that he got at Penrith, he got 2 coaches, didn't he? But he got rid of one to get Ivan Cleary in. He then got rid of Cleary and got Griffin in without interviewing for the job. And then Griffin went and Ivan Cleary was back. So, and plus people forget he was football manager back at the Roosters back in the day too. And coaching is something that is top of his list all the time. Apparently there's a story going around that he stood next to the field when Graham Murray, God rest his soul, was coach of the Roosters, and sent a text to Nick Politis saying can't coach about Graham Murray, and then ended up getting Ricky Stewart in. Ricky did all right with the Roosters, or very well actually. I think there is, and this is really interesting for coaches to listen to, I think, about the appointment of coaches. I've actually got one point I want to bring up as well about the Origin coach in Queensland. There is a pattern with Gus that he does like to get coaches underneath him, I think, that thinks he can manage. And it's no coincidence that Ivan Cleary, I think, was one of his ex-players or somebody he knew from the Roosters. Trent Barrett, he had a bit to deal with, and I would not be surprised if Brad Fittler ends up as the next Bulldogs coach. Maybe that's why he's not thought about it, because it's a done deal.
Yeah, it's a pretty... well, I can see your line of thought. I don't know why Freddie would disappear from the job he has at the moment. I think he's got it pretty good at the moment, coaching State of Origin might be high pressure for a little bit of the year, but I think with the blue side he's got on the paddock at the moment, it may be a little bit easier than they say. They're a bloody good blue side, mate.
Well, as you know, Taylor, this is the first year that I've had off week-to-week coaching for 22 years.
Mm.
And I do admit that one of the good things about this year is I've not had that pressure of any game to deal with. So, when you are a coach, particularly if you're a head coach, everything, including the book, stops with you. Mm. So, B-U-C-K, not B-O-O-K. And that means you tend not to stop thinking about it. And there can be at the end of the year, you can have a bit of time where it's real downtime away from it. So I've got to be honest, this year I don't miss that because I did it for 22 years straight. And to that end, there are coaches who thrive on that. There are others who fail with that. I will admit that one thing I am starting to miss is that being in a team environment, getting to know people and players on a deeper level. And if you're a coach as well, which I am, you do get competitive and you do think you want to throw your hat in the ring for a bigger coaching job, because Fittler will always have this thing hanging over him that he didn't coach the NRL very well.
Mm.
And he's still young enough and has enough lateral thought as a person, is an intelligent guy, has enough lateral thought that he can go back into the NRL arena and right those wrongs from that first time. And I think he's probably still got the drive. Mal was a bit different. Mal just kept the run going, kept the record going. Secondly, he was a bit longer in the tooth. And I don't know, and I don't mean to disregard Mal in any way and what he did, but I don't think he's quite as bright as Freddie. I don't think he was quite as outside the box in terms of a thinker. I don't think also what Mal didn't have that Freddie had, and people forget this about Freddie, he actually came through the system of New South Wales. Mm. So if New South Wales was a club, he came through, coached their 16s and 18s, I believe, or maybe 16s and 20s. I remember him talking about Bradman Best when he was a 16-year-old, for example.
Zach Lomax.
Correct. He then went and coached City Origin.
Mm-hmm.
So what New South Wales have done quite smartly is given a pathway for their coach. And obviously Brad did okay, so they put him into the New South Wales role. So they can turn around and say, well, we didn't just pick him out of obscurity. We allowed him to develop in the junior grades, if you like. And that brings me to Billy Slater, which is one of my points that I wanted to talk about today. And I know you've got something that you want to throw in there too that you want to talk about. There's two things I want to talk about, and I think this is a perfect segue now to Billy Slater. I've just done a post on my social media, and I should have seen it coming. People were writing to me saying, Lee, Origin is a different beast, or Fatty didn't even know his players' names and they still won the thing and all this and blah, 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 blah. Billy Slater has never been the head coach of a game of rugby league before.
Mm.
If he has, it's not common knowledge. So if he coaches under 60s or something, his son's under 60s, I don't know. But he went on record this week as saying, I don't know what kind of coach I am going to be. So I am going to be learning that. And I thought to myself, what a sad indictment of the coaching pathway that one half of two of the best teams in the world, one half of the best team in the world, so half the Australian side, Queensland, is coached by somebody who's never coached rugby league before. Now, what other sports and what other scenarios would you have somebody learning on the job in the highest level possible? I guess I never looked at it the way you've just portrayed it. Yeah.
Nor did I think that Billy Slater was the best coach on hand for the Maroons. I didn't think that. I thought there would have been better choices. But I never looked at it the way that you've just put it then. He is coming into the biggest arena in our game. I think this
100%.
Is bigger, probably bigger than the grand final.
Certainly in the conversation, isn't it?
Certainly. Yeah. And the amount of people that play for Australia before they play State of Origin as well, that happens.
Yeah.
Origin, and although this is maybe a bit offensive to people like you and some like you, Origin has been traditionally sometimes more of a battle than some test matches have been.
Oh, it's too true. You can't be offended by something that's true.
Yeah. They have been. To have someone who's never coached, yes, he's been around arguably the best coach the game's seen in Craig Bellamy. I really love what Craig's done. I don't think the way that Craig coaches, though, can necessarily translate to Origin. I think Origin coaching, it is a different beast. It is still coaching. Just like I think Slater maybe like can't put Bellamy stuff into Origin arena. I don't think Brad Fittler could take what he does in Origin outside of Origin. More to your point from before.
Possibly.
I think the way he coaches, Freddie, is he gets the boys all on the one level. He has those, you'll always read about these grounding sessions where they're walking and they're training with their feet. They're doing breathing sessions. Yeah, a lot of the NRL players will buy into that for Origin. A lot of players will go, this is 2 weeks and I'm just taking my time out to savor the moment in. But to do that for 40 weeks, including preseason in Clubland, I think it may be a little harder to adopt the same techniques at that level.
But I think what a lot of people do when they talk about coaches, to talk about them as if they're one-trick ponies. So I'm pretty convinced Craig Bellyache is smart enough as a coach that if he got the Origin chance again, he would have learned from his previous experiences. That said, I'm not so sure he failed. I know he didn't win, but he was playing against the best Queensland side that's probably ever been assembled too.
Yeah.
So does that make him a failure? I'd say there's a conversation needed there. So to that extent, I can't say that on one hand about Bellyache and then not say that about Brad Fittler. You know, is he going to try and make people walk on grass every week for 40 weeks in a year? I think he's mentally agile enough to think this is what I'm going to learn. This is the difference. This argument that Origin is a different beast, I totally understand that. But forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's still rugby league. And I'm pretty sure as well that if you are a coach and you are 18-0 down at halftime, you need certain skills to be able to turn that game around. Likewise, if your team is 18-0 ahead at halftime, you need certain skills to ensure that it doesn't become 18-all. You need certain skills. You need to learn how to do the interchange. You need to learn how to manage the environment. You need to learn how to deal with so many things. People just talk about coaching as if it's the X's and the O's. People just talk about coaching as if it's just drills and games in training and then picking a team at the weekend. You know, ask any coach out there in the community. One of the biggest things they'll have to deal with is parents, right? And there's not much about them on coaching courses. One of the biggest things they'll have to deal with is parents complaining, league rules, league demands. They'll have to deal with committee members. You know, and that's just at the club level. So if you imagine what that's like at Origin. Now, can I just say, before everyone jumps down my throat again, like they know that, I've got no doubt when I look through my comments on my Facebook, most of them will be people that will be saying, oh, Queensland have got to win, they've picked the right coach, and blah, 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 blah. I do not want Billy to fail. Number two, I'm a massive Billy Slater fan. Number three, I think Billy Slater will be a great coach. But to learn the trade in Origin, like, what does that say to every young coach in Queensland who's aspiring to that opportunity of one-day coaching Queensland? So there'll be younger people than you and I, Taylor, who are thinking, coaching could be an option. But then there's even NRL coaches with Queensland blood in them who didn't get offered this job. What I would have liked to have seen is something like Billy Slater with Wayne Bennett over him as a sort of performance director type role, or Billy Slater with a couple of real fair income coaches, not ex-players. So one of the arguments back has been, if Jonathan Thurston, Cameron Smith can't prepare a side, then who can? Well, I sit in my cafe every week and I watch the cook cooking. Doesn't mean I can cook the same meal. And I'm very good at eating it too. And just because you've been a jockey doesn't mean you can be a horse. And just because you've been a horse doesn't mean you can be a jockey. And I guess people just write off coaching in Origin as if it's just some kind of breeze through it. Nah, I'm sorry, it's a bit more than that. Like I said, I'm a massive fan of Billy Slater. You know, he might win the series this year. Does that make him a great coach, or does it mean New South Wales had a couple of injuries? Or, you know, there's so many things. How does he deal with it if one of his players, like Josh Dugan did a couple of years ago, goes out and has a few schooners on the Saturday before a Wednesday Origin? What's he going to do with that? Man management skills required there. There was a few stories knocking around that during one of the changeovers of Origin coach, I won't name which coach to which coach, but you can probably guess that player power was quite instrumental when the new coach took over, that a lot of rules were relaxed. And all I'll say is when Queensland Origin were very successful, they were getting out of bed at times that they didn't want to, and they were doing things that the coach wanted them to, that they didn't necessarily want them to do. when he wasn't the coach, a few things started to get relaxed. And I guess there's been enough in the Queensland performance in the last few years to me to suggest that I'm very brave saying this, considering I live in Queensland, but the 11 on the trot was more of a product of the fact that they had a good group of players, and it was rare that so many of them came through the same system and were brought to the same club as well in Melbourne Storm. And I think there's a lot to suggest that the last few years, the system of developing players and coaches in Queensland for the last decade hasn't been up to scratch, because if you actually analyse some of the results in Origin over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been some shellackings. Like, there's been some real big losses for New South Wales in some of those games. No matter which way you look at it, that has happened. The other thing, they even picked a player last year who didn't even qualify for them, and only found out because somebody tweeted it. So this is very interesting, very interesting. So I mean, I'm glad we ended up going in that direction, actually, because I brought Billy Slater into it. That said, I do think Origin is an open book this year.
All right, well, let's move on now. On Monday, yesterday, for whenever people are watching this, that's the 30th. I sent you an email. And then you called me 5 minutes later.
Yeah. And
I thought, this is it. He's read the email. And you said to me, mate, let's do this on Tuesday night, blah, blah, blah. And we basically said the same things to each other. And you said, come with a point. And I'd already emailed you that point. I said, don't read it. I want to say it.
I just deleted your email. I didn't look at it. Yeah.
Now, I thought because we're on Origin, we could talk about this a bit further. This is my message and what I'd like to hear your thoughts on as a coach, and what I think as a player, coaches get wrong so often.
Yep.
The State of Origin sides have been announced.
Yeah. And
there's certain people in certain positions that weren't expected, a la Ben Hunt and Harry Grant. People were very surprised that Ben Hunt, as a halfback in Clubland, was picked in hooker over Harry Grant, who's arguably one of the best hookers in the game at the moment. Queensland don't have a shortage of hookers, but they do have someone who's typically playing 7 there. I want to ask how important team balance is and the balance of those players in those positions, because I saw that and I thought that was a really smart move. I thought they've thought about their interchange, what happens if someone gets injured. They've thought about all that. But I want to hear your thoughts on team balance and how important that is for a side and for a coach to get right in their 17.
I think it's absolutely vital. I think if anything, it's almost the weapon if you get that right. So it's almost you're available and you are ready for every circumstance. So I've been on record before as saying that I believe championship teams have 2, 3, or 4 stars, and the rest are what I call fillers. Now, going back to your playing career, you would have been a filler. James Tedesco was a star. All right? Just be aware your microphone's going a bit funny again. So
Sorry.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. It's because you lay down, I reckon. You're snoozing. Because if you have a team of stars in a game like Rugby League, stars tend to, and I'm being very stereotypical here, right? Stars tend to put a lot more emphasis on their attack than they do their defence. Stars tend to wait to have 10 involvements that are quality rather than having 35 involvements and hoping that some of them are quality.
Yeah.
Fillers tend to be the opposite. And the reality is, if you're going to win a premiership or you're going to win an Origin series, there's going to be some times where you need to defend your own goal line under duress.
Yes.
There's going to be times when, even though you're winning a game, you're going to be under the cosh from the opposition, and you need a certain type of player to deal with things in that scenario. There's also going to be times in the game when you've got to manage the tempo of the game, just sit on the ball, keep it in play, or kick it out of play, so on and so forth. Stars tend to want to come up with the big play to break the game open.
Yes.
Fillers tend to do the same thing all the time. So if you were a filler as a prop, you have your carry, the difference between your absolute best carry and your average carry wouldn't have been that different, being 10 metres maybe or something, all being equal. So I think the essential thing is to have that balance, the fillers and the stars. To that end, you zoomed in on the Ben Hunt and the Harry Grant scenario.
Yes.
I think I really like that because one of the reasons Queensland was so successful for a long time was they had a man called Cameron Smith who could do almost anything from dummy half.
Yes.
There's not been many players been able to do that in the history of the game. Put Ben Hunt and Harry Grant together in the 9 role, you might get close to that. And I just think that with Ben Hunt there at 9, he can easily switch to 7 if he needs to. I assume the 6 and 7 will be Munster and Daly Cherry Evans.
Yes.
There was a period in last year's Origin where I think they actually had 3 pivots on the field and a hooker, so I think they were moving it around a bit more. And people tend to forget that in the 3rd Origin game last year, Ben Hunt was very pivotal in getting Queensland over the line last year. I think he scored 2 tries, something like that, and he was a lightning rod off the bench from memory. So I liked it. There's also been that doubt about Harry Grant having the flu or whatever it may be.
They say that every year. Every year, someone in Queensland camp has the flu. And I don't know if there's something in the squad, if they just pick a number when they pick the squad and say, this bloke now has the flu.
Yeah, but, yeah. I mean, Billy did say he's not going to play any games with the squad, and I tend to believe him the way he said it. He's not got a big long nose like Phil Gould, but I think balance is everything. I think I remember going back 20 odd years, maybe longer. Australia used to have Steve Menzies as one edge back rower, and the other one was Gary Larson. Steve Menzies in some big games did between 2 and 10 tackles. Gary Larson did 40 of them.
Yeah.
So there's your yin and yang there. You can have your props where you have props who just do carry after carry after carry after carry. Then you have other props who do a few less carries, but they make the equivalent amount of meters in a game because they are big runners. They just have to save a bit in the tank. And then, of course, you get players like somebody like Payne Haas who can tend to do both. So he's taken the game to another level. We're not going to get into his financial situation, though. Although I will say this, to tell you what I would do, I'd sack him. I would say, mate, if you don't want to be here, you're gone. It's that simple. Because it affects the dressing room, and I've no doubt that it affected Broncos in the first half in the game against the Titans.
Well, I think it goes to a deeper level where the next person that plays good footy that wants more money is just going to rock up on a night before a game and say, I want to release.
Yeah.
You know what it's like when you have a really performing sides, teams that focus on winning and make success the peak of what they do, the pinnacle. They have really high standards and they drive that no matter who you are.
Yeah.
I think if the Broncos want to strive to be one of those clubs again, they need to make it more about the brand than any individual could ever be.
Don't disagree.
Coach, CEO, everyone, top to bottom. If you wear a Broncos shirt and you go to work, the most important thing is the Broncos and the club.
And sorry, mate, go on.
And that's if people aren't doing that, then they don't fit into the mold, and they need to listen. It's crazy. I don't know if I've told you this story. I might have. I've said it recently, but I might have. Anyway, when I moved to Redcliffe, the club gave me a job as a gardener at the Leagues Club.
Yeah.
And once a month, they used to do barbecues for every employee that works at Redcliffe at Dolphins. And we would get there and there'd be bar staff. There'd be people that work in the cafe. There'd be cooks and chefs downstairs. All these people involved in the club, not just the football side of things. And there was probably 3 players. That's it, because we used to work as garden staff. And the CEO used to say, how the month's gone, all that sort of stuff. And then he used to go, remember, guys, here's your booklet, which is everyone gets when you start. And it says, open the front page. Goal 1 for everyone that works at Redcliffe Leagues Club is to win premierships.
Okay.
If there's anything you can do as a bar staff to win it was just a goal number 1. If you worked at Redcliffe, your goal was to win premierships. And then number 2 or 3 was to get into the NRL.
Wow. And what years are we talking here?
2014, 2013.
So nearly a decade ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I guess that's what they do. Yeah. That's what performing people and clubs and associations
and a holistic approach. Payne Haas isn't going to end up at a club getting more money than he's on now. That is going to be a top performing club because the top performing clubs don't let the salary cap get bent out of shape. And one of the things that happens, is players do talk to each other. So there'll be coaches watching this who pay players at A grade or whatever it may be. There will be coaches who do that. There'll be coaches who, at the community level, who spend a bit more time dealing with one player over another, or they'll confide in a couple of players and not in some others. Players tell each other everything.
Yeah.
I remember, I've been around Clubland a long time, and I remember in Super League when I worked, one of the props was openly questioning why another player got £50,000 more than him, despite doing half the work in terms of minutes and hit-ups and meters. People do talk about it. The best performing clubs in rugby league, particularly in a salary cap sport, most people tend to be on similar wages, and there tends to be a price structure that is transparent and open to everyone. So a lot of players go to the Roosters and stay at the Roosters, and because they're happy to take unders. They're happy to take less money because they know that they're going to get looked after in other ways, in so many other ways. I mean, the Roosters brought Adrian Morley from England a few weeks ago to celebrate the 20th anniversary. I remember Phil Clark, the old Great Britain lock, telling me that when he broke his neck over here, the treatment from the Roosters was sensational.
Yeah.
You should have brought him in, mate, or her.
I think he's had a blow up.
So for those listening, Taylor's just nearly been interrupted by his child, and he silently gestured, "Get out of the room."
As a good father, I've ignored him.
Yes. Phil Clark talked about how the club looked after him medically, and so 30 years on, he's still a Rooster. That's the kind of thing that carries through. So, to the community coaches out there who particularly are listening, or whatever coaching job you're in, it's those kind of things that carry through, isn't it, Taylor? There's something I wanted to talk about. I deal and mentor coaches quite a lot, and sometimes coaches invite me to coach their team or webinars with their team or whatever it may be. And the comment I always hear after every single one is that you're not telling them anything I've not told them, Lee. All right? Now, that's not to say people shouldn't use me, right? But the difference, one of the big problems that people are having, and this happens with coaches all the time, and you see it in the NRL, teams do things all right for 5-10 minutes and then they go away from it. And they go away from it because it's not a deep enough lesson that's been ingrained in their head. So it's not a default thing to do when they are under pressure. So when they cop a bit of pressure, they go back to what they know. So my message to any coaches out there, if you want to reverse the behaviours of your players, keep your messaging as simple as possible so that they can understand it through white noise. Number 2, make sure your training is related to what you want them to do. So make sure that it's game specific. Number 3, make sure that when they do that training, you correct them and don't accept it until it is perfect. And then number 4, when you've got it perfect, do it time and time and time and time and time and time again. Because the big thing I see and the big things I end up dealing with coaches is that you can tell they've covered certain things. We see it when we're doing the Queensland League scene segment.
Yeah.
You can tell they've covered some things. But how often they've covered it, how much depth they've covered it in, and how many times they've repeated it and corrected it and everything else, that's a different question entirely.
Yeah, you find out in the 30th and the 70th minute.
That's right.
Once the fatigue really sets in.
Yeah.
For all your players. And and I guess that's something you've been doing for a long, long time, because I remember doing, for those of you that do follow Lee's stuff, we've done a chat between a couple of us, St. Greg's boys, not long ago. And we spoke about how we weren't a very big side. So we had to focus on skill and technique, and that had to be perfect. So we did 3v2s out on the oval, on the main oval at St. Greg's, till we got 50 in a row perfect, till we got that many in a row. And it wasn't like, it's 5:30, so Lee can't keep the kids for any longer because it's a school night. No, we did them till we got them. We did them till we got them. And if there was something that stopped us for, if we were having a morning session and kids had to get to school and it was getting dire straits, the next time we got to training, we'd be doing them till we got there. It was a non-negotiable. It was a non-negotiable that we completed that. And the big games we won, it was because we had high completion rates and we finished the few opportunities we got, we converted them.
That's right.
Because we had the skill and the technique ready to go.
And I think you'll find somewhere like Melbourne, they have a very similar approach in that, it's just a brutal approach to repetition. And, if I ask you to run 10 metres and you run 9, I'm sorry, Taylor, you're doing it again.
Mm.
So if in doubt, run 11.
Yeah.
Just so I can't misconstrue the 10 metres, and I guess, that's a big thing to see, because a lot of teams and fans will see this too when they're watching their team. They'll go great for 10 minutes and then they'll wonder why they go away from that. Well, players go away from things because they don't know them as habit. They don't know them as habit, and it's the way you teach it, the way you coach it. And if you train against fresh air with unopposed, well, you're going to have a bit of a problem when somebody tries to tackle you, because that brings another dynamic into play, which is training when you're in fight or flight mode. But we'll save that for another pod.
Depends if I was in defence. I was pretty good at flighting when I was in defence. Well, mate, now we're having a bit of a laugh. Let's talk about what you got up to in the past week for rugby league coach. What did you do? Where were you? Where did you have any clinics, mate? Or did you just sit on your lounge thinking about me all week?
Somewhere between the two. So I managed to confirm my final holiday roadshow. So bear with me. The start of the Queensland school holidays, last week of June. 2 days in Bundaberg. Can't wait to go back up to Bundaberg, and they love their football up there. And did a good clinic there at the East Magpies Club, and they may have taken me for a drink when it finished. But I can't do too much this time because I've got to be back in Jimboomba, back in southeast Queensland. It looks like it's going to be a whopping programme at Jimboomba based on early participant numbers. Jimboomba, for those who don't know, is sort of halfway between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, and it's sort of away from the motorway a little bit in the Bow Desert sort of region. I think, is it Highlands? Is that classed as the Highlands? Or
I'm not sure. I just know you drive to the Black Stump and you turn left and keep going.
Yeah, that'll do. And then after Jimboomba, I fly to Melbourne to do a 2-day clinic there. That will be my second trip to Melbourne, because 2 weeks earlier I'd been to Northwest Wolves 3 days, where I'm doing a club-specific aim higher. So some of the Queensland League scenes will be from Melbourne again. After Melbourne, back to Southeast Queensland for a week. Can you believe that? I'm in Southeast Queensland for a week. Jeez. 2 days at Sanford, Monday, Tuesday. This is the second week of the Queensland holidays. 2 days at Logan. Last time we did a clinic at Logan, there was 101 kids there. So if we get anywhere near that, I'll be happy. But sales and the participant numbers going well for that already. We're still 5 weeks away. 1 day in Ipswich. And then the following week, I do a new venue in Sydney, in Western Sydney, which you will know well, Doonside. So might see some future Brian Totos and Stephen Crichtons and whatnot. Some of the kids out in Penrith are sensational. So
there'll be some Paddy's Blacktown kids in there for sure.
That's right. So a big touring regime. You asked me had I done any clinics this week. I went to Narang to finish one off that started in late Feb.
Wow.
Because with rain, with COVID, with me going overseas for a while, it kept getting delayed the last session. So I did the last session, and I've got to be honest, the grounds are so wet out there. So I just started to try and get back out doing some coaching, and it's still a bit hard at some venues. I know my old school, Maple Park, as we record this week, they are starting their Langer Cup campaign. They rang something like 10 grounds to get a home venue before they got one. So we've still got big problems. And I follow some clubs on my Facebook feed, and some of them still aren't training. They're going to give it a try on Wednesday, so on and so forth. And I guess, to your point, I will. As soon as I can, I'll be out coaching. I'm going into some schools now. And one thing for everyone out there too, if you feel that your kids, so either your child, if you're a parent, or your kids at your club, if you do want some kind of program just to accelerate what they're doing, please reach out, because I'm offering that at quite a cheap rate at the minute, because kids have missed out on so much, Taylor. I mean, you're a father and your kids no doubt get involved in stuff, and the rain does affect things, doesn't it?
Well, I actually completed my level 1 coaching course last night. So I guess what I'm trying to say is soon I'll be the host and the subject of this show. I'm going to do But they said last night, what has been the hardest challenge coaching your kids this year? And I said, mate, the rain. And he laughed and he said, I know. What about everything else? I said, no, the rain. I've had probably 3 training sessions with an under 6 side and 2 games. And I've already picked out things with each kid that I want them to work on and stuff. But we've had 3 games since we've seen each other now, 3 weeks since we've seen each other. And the development for those kids, we're going to start back from square one again, of course, and it's under 6s. But the amount of kids that would be affected from this period would be huge. So, certainly I'd encourage that. If anyone out there is thinking of their kids and they want to get some extra skills into them. Just because it's raining doesn't mean you can't call Lee, because he'll be inside waiting for your call.
One of the worrying things I did hear when coaching kids is some parents are taking the kids to things like jiu-jitsu and karate and whatnot. So I just think, I'm not one of these who's jumping on to the league and saying it's terrible, you've cancelled the games. Because I've seen some of the venues. I guess all I'm saying to the leagues is please think outside the square. If it's gala days, do gala days. If it's a couple of midweek games, do a couple of midweek games. If it's a lot of games, because there will be some venues in Southeast Queensland and New South Wales that are okay. Yes. If you need to play game after game after game on there, then so be it. So, and of course, you get those people who say we played on this back in the day and so on. I guess the problem is now that councils are a lot stricter. Councils are a lot stricter here, particularly than in England. I mean, if we didn't play in some of the conditions you get called off here in England, we'd never play rugby league.
Yeah,
we just simply wouldn't. So there's that dynamic too. So yeah, it's been a frustrating time for all families out there, and I totally understand it. What about you, Taylor? You're not getting itchy feet about playing?
No. I miss hanging around with the boys sometimes, but the amount of conversations I have with Host Plus Cup players from all different teams now on a weekly basis is just as good. I still catch up with those lads. I do Queensland League scene.
Yeah.
I do this podcast. I still commentate on a weekly basis in the BRL and for the QRL. And I'm in negotiations with another podcast possibly releasing in the next week or so. So I get plenty of footy fix, mate. I still get it all coming in hot. So
yeah, no, good on you. That it's funny. I think deep down, a lot of us just want to be involved in the game, don't we? Deep down, so it's good.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. But I've still got the footy in the backyard, still kicking with my young fella. I've got footy posts set up in the backyard. So yeah, just because there's a bit of rain, the council hasn't shut my yard yet. So we'll see.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks, mate. We'll see everyone next weekend.
We will.
Next week, sorry. Yeah.
Next week. Yeah.